So one of the things that I talk about a lot is embracing the new normal.
Ooh, tell me about
So
that.
by new normal, what I mean is the place where we're at now, because that's normal for us now.
Yes.
For me, the day before my son died, I was a dad. The day after my son died, I was still a dad, but I didn't have my son.
Right.
Normal had changed. For me, normal was never going to be the same as it was before.
Right.
And so I have to learn how to adapt and how to work within the range of what normal is now.
Welcome to Stories of Hope in Hard Times, the show that explores how people endure and even thrive in difficult times, all with God's help. I'm your host, Tamara K. Anderson. Join me on a journey to find inspiring stories of hope and wisdom learned in life's hardest moments.
My next guest was born and raised in Utah and has stayed because family is important to him. He is something of a Renaissance man. He loves to read, write, paint, draw, sing, and ballroom dance. His day, night, and weekend job is being a realtor. He's been married for 25 years to an amazing woman named Susan that rolls her eyes at his dad jokes, but he is sure that she is laughing hysterically inside. As a writer, he is known by the name of A.D. Sherman. I am pleased to present Alan Smith. Alan, are you ready to share your story of hope?
Let's go.
Awesome. So first we have to tackle your A.D. Sherman name. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, so my name is Alan Smith.
Uh-huh.
That's a little boring.
Yeah.
There's
probably a lot of those.
You go to look on the shelf and you see a Smith. That's not really that exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm a little shy about my writing still, I think. And so I decided I was going to write under a pseudonym. And I thought about it for a long time. And I was known as Sherman by a lot of friends in high school, kind of a throwback to the Bullwinkle and Rocky show where they had Sherman and Peabody, the dog that adopted the little boy.
Yes.
And so I went by Sherman for a lot of years. And so as I was playing with names, I'm like, what can I do? And I'm like, oh, I could do my initials and Sherman. So it's A.D. Sherman. A is for Alan. And the D can be a lot of different things, because it could be for death and dismemberment. And it could be for dragons and Dracula and all of those just fun things. Disillusionment.
There you go. You leave it open to interpretation.
It can be just open and fun and something to play with all the time.
Oh, very good. I love that. Well, that is fun. And you're working on releasing a book soon.
I am working on a book. It is called The Undertaker's Apprentice.
Wonderful.
And it's about a 16-year-old boy who, on his first awkward day as the Undertaker's apprentice, he accidentally becomes a sorcerer.
Ooh, sounds good. You'll have to keep us posted on that. So today we're going to dive back into your story of your life.
Oh, and there's lots of stories.
Oh, and we're going to talk about a couple of them. So this is going to be great. So why don't you take us back to your childhood a little bit and tell us what it was like growing up in your household?
So growing up in my house was really interesting. I was the oldest of 4 kids.
Uh-huh.
And I was also very, very small. So I didn't get included in a lot of things. In fact, I got bullied by several of the people that I grew up with in my neighborhood.
Darn it.
And so I didn't have a lot of friends. I had one friend that I hung around with, and he was awesome. But other than that, I just didn't really have a good connection with a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a struggle. My mom had some complications with a couple of pregnancies and with postpartum and different things like that. And so at a really young age, I spent a lot of time doing the laundry and cooking the meals and doing all sorts of things like that. In fact, one year my brother sent me a Mother's Day card because, he's just kind of a smart aleck that way. But and we joke a lot in our family and stuff, but that's kind of how it was. I took care of the kids a lot growing up, so I didn't have a lot of childhood. I didn't do a lot of fun things.
Right, but yet Did you joke a lot back then, or have you become more so lately?
That's something that I've worked into over the last 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
You kind of grow into it and you learn to deal with the things that happen in life and how to accept them and how to work through them and have a sense of humor around it.
That's awesome. I think that's a really good way to do things. I know my husband has that gift too. He's always been a little bit of a jokester, and it's actually been very helpful as we have passed through hard times. So it's a good thing to remember. It's good to laugh, right?
It is. It's really good.
That's awesome. So when you were 18, you had something very unusual happen to you.
So when I was 18 years old, I had a pretty significant stroke.
Which is so unusual for an 18-year-old.
Yeah, you don't expect that. It's something that's just a little bit different for an 18-year-old.
Yeah, why don't you tell us about that? Walk us to that
we
day.
We didn't identify it right away. It was several months later that we realized what had happened.
Okay.
So I was working. I worked in a warehouse ironically, at a book warehouse.
Oh, there you go.
And I was at work and I got feeling really, just all of a sudden I got really dizzy and very nauseous, and I couldn't stand up and I couldn't see. And it was very, just kind of insane. Well, I worked there with my mom and we had driven together that day and she had to be at work all day. So I went up and went into the bathroom upstairs away from everything. And I spent, good half hour, 45 minutes throwing up and just being miserable. And dragged myself finally out to the couch in the break room, and that's where I slept all day.
Wow.
And within a couple of days, I felt better and not completely better, but, better enough that I was able to go back to work. And we thought that was the end of it. Well, I went in for a physical when I was 18, and they do this little test where they have you look at their nose, and they put their fingers out to the side and they say, how many fingers do you see over here? And how many fingers do you see over here? Well, I could see one side. I could not see the fingers on the other side. They just didn't exist to me. I'm like, oh, there's two fingers over here, showing this side. And he had both arms out.
Oh, interesting.
And so this brought about a lot of tests and a lot of different things. And they misdiagnosed me as having an issue with a heart valve and took blood thinners for years and just different things like that to kind of help manage the situation because they still didn't know.
Right.
So fast forward to about 12 years, well, maybe 14, 15 years ago, because time flies.
Yeah, it does.
And I'm having stroke symptoms or MS symptoms. We're just really not sure what's going on. I'm having weakness. I'm having just lots of different things. We go in and see a doctor and they're like, oh, you have what's called a PFO, or an opening between the chambers in your heart, and that allows little blood clots to happen. So I was having more little strokes again.
Oh,
and so we went in and had a little surgery that they do with a catheter, and went in and closed up that hole with a device that is generally pretty successful, except for in like 5% of the people. Here's 5% over here. It's me. So it didn't completely seal the hole. So try another surgery 10 months later to see what they can do, because they thought it was another hole, but it was just the first hole. And I mean, so there's just like all of these different weird things over the years that have just kind of continued to rear their head around that first stroke and the experience of trying to figure out what in the heck is going on with me? Why do I feel tired all the time? Why do I feel, why do I just not feel like I can really accomplish much?
Wow.
And so we thought it was depression, and we thought it was this, we thought it was that. And finally, about that, like I said, about 14, 15 years ago, we figured out what it was. And so that made a big difference in my ability to start moving forward and be able to really accomplish things in life, knowing what it was instead of always wondering.
Right. Wow. That's crazy. So it took them that long to be able to diagnose that first episode at 18 years old as a stroke then.
So a few months later, they're like, well, it probably was a stroke. And I'm like, well, Really? Probably. Well, because they didn't have it right then, they can't, say, well, yeah, for sure it was.
Mm-hmm.
But it's obvious because, MRIs were new at the time. Yes,
Oh.
I am that old. And so they used to drive around in a semi-truck and deliver it to each hospital, and they'd each get a day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, pretty funny, right? And so right at the beginning of that new technology, they were able to go in and look at the MRI of my brain, and there's dead zones.
Oh boy. You're like, thanks.
Gray spots that are obviously from a stroke. And so, you start putting all of those pieces together, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, here you go.
Wow. That is really interesting. And so just watch for those symptoms so that I bet they're probably better at recognizing it now.
There are some really good keys to being able to watch for things like that. If you see a little drooping in someone's face, or you feel tingling in your face and in your fingertips, or,
Did you feel that?
Yeah.
Oh, you did?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But, this is 30-ish years ago.
Right.
Or so. And so, they really didn't look at those things. They didn't really look for how to manage that, or they didn't expect 18-year-olds to have strokes or things like that. So
no,
they just really didn't look at all of the things that could happen there. So,
wow, that's crazy. So after age 18, you ended up getting married.
Yeah. So I've been married for 25 years.
Congratulations. Wonderful.
We had our anniversary last February, which was amazing.
Oh, fantastic. 25 years.
Yeah. And she hasn't kicked me out yet. So we're in good shape.
That's good. That's really good. And I have met your wife, and she's a wonderful woman.
Well, she must be if she's married to me.
That's right.
To have put up with me for that long.
Oh, my goodness. But marriage and parenthood did not start off as smooth sailing for you guys.
No, it really didn't.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
So May 6th of 1996, we were blessed to be parents.
Awesome.
We had the birth of our first son, whose name is Bryce. And it was amazing. And he was beautiful and perfect and healthy, and everything was great, except that August 14th of 1996, he died at daycare of SIDS.
Oh my gosh.
Just, not something you can plan for or expect or know is going to happen. It just, you go to work and the police show up at work and say, we have bad news. We need to take you back to the babysitters.
Oh my gosh. What were you thinking at that point?
Well, they told us what had happened.
Oh, they did.
And then took us over to spend time with him. And what do? You bawl.
Yeah.
And you try to recreate, what your life's going to look like going forward.
Yeah. That must have been so challenging. Did you find that you and your wife grieved differently?
Of course we did. For me, my job is the protector. Mm-hmm. My job is to take care of the family and to make sure that everything's okay. And so for me, I was about trying to control things and make sure that things were done right now. And, or because apparently I had screwed up somewhere. I hadn't done my job. I hadn't, done what I was supposed to. And for her, it was this emptiness of this place where she, should have never been to work. She shouldn't have gone to work because he felt abandoned, because somebody said that.
Gosh.
That's why he left, because he felt abandoned. And so for years she felt like, she had done something wrong. The blessing for us was that it didn't happen at home, that it did happen at daycare. And that was really rough on the amazing woman who was watching him.
Sure.
Because she's the one that found him instead of us.
Right.
And so that took away some of the issues that other families have had in dealing with the death of an infant.
Right.
But we still had a lot of issues. We had to deal with the ideas of what if? What if I had just gone to pick him up 2 hours earlier? What if, we hadn't taken him to daycare that day? What if, what if? There's always 100 things you think about that maybe you could have done differently.
Right.
And then after that, you're thinking about all the things that you're going to miss out on. all the things that will never happen. We'll never get to see him married. We'll never get to see him go to school. We'll never get to see him do any of those things. So a lot of it was, the loss of expectations,
Yes,
and that can be really, really difficult as well.
it is. And I know I remember learning about the loss of expectations when our son was diagnosed with autism, and that those dreams crumbled, and that same thing happened for you. And we don't think that we grieve those expectations. Oh, but we do. It's amazing how powerful those images in our mind become. So what did you do to cope with that?
So we kind of threw ourselves into helping other people.
Really?
We had an amazing woman that her name is Jolene.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, her name's Jody, but she prefers Jolene. Jody came to our house the first day, that very first day.
Mm-hmm.
We were told by the police officers that responded and that took care of us that it looked like SIDS.
Mm-hmm.
And so they gave us a phone number for a hotline, and we called, and this woman shows up at our house out of the blue.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a peer counselor, someone who'd been through it.
Okay.
And she was there, and she held our hands and walked us through it and was there for us and suggested things that maybe we wouldn't think of that could be done before the funeral. So we were able to have somebody go and do a plaster cast of his hand and of his foot that sits in our curio cabinet, which is fantastic. When I'm just having one of those days, I can just go over and look at it, because I don't want to rub I don't want to rub on it or anything, because that would, remove the detailing. But so she was just there, and we could call her and bawl, and she was there.
Oh.
We had support group meetings once a month for families. And so we went and we were able to talk to other people who had had the same experience or similar experiences, and were dealing with that. And so we had a lot of support through that group, through the Utah SIDS Alliance at that time. And when the time came, they asked us if we would be willing to step in and help other people and to do some of that. And so Susan and I took over as the co-presidents of that organization for a few years.
Wonderful.
And we were able to run the support groups, and we were able to help and work with the state health department in doing educational things. We ran something called the Back to Sleep campaign, and we had these little itty bitty baby t-shirts printed up that said this side up for the front, so that people would remember to place babies on their backs instead of placing them on their side or on their tummy to sleep, because the incidence of SIDS was much higher when they were on their side or when they were on their tummy to sleep.
Interesting.
Don't know what that is. Don't know why. There's a lot of theories and a lot of different things around SIDS that people just don't understand and don't know. And that's kind of what SIDS is the absence of a diagnosis or of a reason. And so we were able to do just some amazing things. We were able to work with some amazing families all over the state. In fact, there's another group of families down in southern Utah that would help and worked on running support groups down there. And so it was amazing to be able to create this community of people that could support one another and be a part of that. And we still are super close to those families and run into them all the time or call them or do things. And so it's been really nice to have that support.
Yeah, I can see that. So what were your conversations with God like at that point?
Why? A whole lot of why. Over the years, I've learned that the why was because I had something to learn, and I needed to be in a place where I could benefit others. I needed the life experience of where I'm at in order to do the things that I need to do with my life. Doesn't necessarily mean you're happy to hear that.
No.
Or happy to learn that as you go.
No.
But that's what my conversations with God were like. It was, here's what you're supposed to do with this. So, and over the last 23 years since Bryce died, we've had the opportunity to be there and support many of our friends, family, strangers, people that live near us, in dealing with significant issues and grief around the loss of someone in their life, not necessarily just babies, but spouses and siblings or parents, because it creates a different thought process for me around, if somebody's hurting, I need to be there to help take care of them.
Because you've been there.
Been there, done that.
Yeah.
Don't want to ever do it again.
No. Darn it. I know, right?
Right.
Did that impact at all? Now you have 2 other children. Did that make you guys scared to have more children?
So our next oldest is Haley. She's 21 now, and she's a mom herself.
Wonderful.
When we were pregnant, when my wife was pregnant with Haley, she was just a little bit of a train wreck and just worried that everything's going to be, that she's not ever going to make it, that it's not, something's going to happen before she's ever born. And I was totally calm and at peace and that everything would be fine. Well, when the baby was born, when Haley was born, we traded places.
Oh.
And so Susan was really pretty calm around things and felt pretty comfortable. And I was a train wreck.
Oh.
And so the kids got used to me popping in the middle of the night, and I'd go put my hand on them and just make sure they were breathing. And I'd check on them, and so my kids never snuck out of the house as youth because they knew that Dad would probably wake up and catch them, because I'd check in on them all night long. It was just, if I woke up, I went in and checked on my kids. And so,
yeah, just
one of those crazy things. And there's probably a little bit of crazy there, but it is what it is, and that's just how I managed it.
Yeah, it's probably your role as protector. When your wife was when your wife was pregnant, your wife was in control.
There's
right?
nothing I could do.
Yeah, and so it's once the baby was born that you felt like, okay, I've got to protect my kids.
I got to make sure everybody's okay.
Yeah,
I got to make sure everything's done right. I got to make sure that they're sleeping okay, and that my wife, if there's something happened, that my wife isn't the one to find them or whatever,
Right.
There's there's a lot of stuff that goes on in your head.
That must have been hard. Do you still wake up at night even though your kids aren't in your house anymore?
Yeah, but not as much.
Right. So now they're grown up and you can say, okay, I've checked that box.
Yeah.
They're their own people now.
Yeah, we've taught them what we can and sent them on their way. So they've sent themselves on their way.
Yeah, right.
and they call for advice, and I do the best I can and giving them ideas on how to manage what's going on in their worlds, and you just have to let them do their thing. Try not to be in the middle of it all.
Right. So you've had quite the array of experiences, and I know that you have even more beyond the 3 that we've discussed so far. What lessons have you been able to pull from this? I mean, you talked about the empathy and empathizing and serving others. So that's definitely something. But what else?
So one of the things that I ask myself in every situation, and I have done this for years, is what is it that I need to learn from this? What is it that this is going to do for me in my life moving forward? How do I take this and use it in a positive way?
Right.
Because you can take all of the crazy stuff that happens in your life and you can let it beat you down. You can let it be something that just makes you a miserable, cantankerous, evil, nasty person to be around. Or you can use it to say, okay, what did I learn? How can I be a better person because of this? I can go back and track all of the things that have happened in my life and some of the friends that I've made and the places that I live now. I can trace those back to my son dying.
Isn't that interesting?
Because that turned us down a different path. The fact that I don't have any peripheral vision on my left side directed me to buy a specific type of car that has a little blind spot detector that flashes at me, when there's a car in my blind spot. There's things that you do because of certain other things. And so if we look at the fact that, we're guided in our lives, people expect it to be this big flashing thing that's out there and says, hey, you're supposed to turn left. like on the freeway. We still miss those, right?
Yes, we do.
But, when we don't have much choice because of an event in our life, we make a decision that directs us a certain way. We're being directed. We're being guided to where we need to be to learn the things that we need to learn.
Yeah. So you've been able to take these instances and say, all right, God's putting me on a different path. It might not be the path I want to walk.
That's for sure.
But he's putting me on this path, and what can I learn from it?
Exactly. Because I certainly would not have put myself on the path of having a child that had passed away.
No, never. I don't think any parent would.
No, right?
Yeah.
They all the time say in movies, parents are not supposed to outlive their children.
Yeah.
And it's true, because that's a sentiment that we all have, and people shouldn't get cancer, and people shouldn't have to deal with abuse, and people shouldn't have to, go through lots of medical and health things, but we all do. We all have our things in life that are in front of us, whether we like them or not. The only thing we get to choose, really, is how we react to any given situation.
Yeah.
We don't get to choose how the car drives in front of us and that they run a red light and hit us. We don't get to choose those things. All we get to do is just make choices around how we deal with consequences and how we deal with the events as they come up in our lives.
Oh, that's such wise wisdom there that you're passing on. Thank you. What other things have you learned from all these tragedies?
That we tend to look at the negative. One of the things that we learned early on after our son died is that we tend to make things just a lot worse than they really are. So we met with a psychologist that came in and worked with the group. And he introduced something to us that he called awfulizing.
Awfulizing. Okay, tell me about awfulizing.
So it's like you get a hangnail, and it gets worse and it gets worse, and all of a sudden you just feel like you're going to have to go in and get your thumb amputated, right?
Yeah,
because it hurts so bad.
Yeah,
and so you've taken this little hangnail, and your thumb is throbbing, and you're sure it's infected, and you're sure that you're going to have to go in and at least have the nail taken off or whatever.
Right.
You've created this thing that is just horrible.
Right.
Out of something that's really pretty small. And it's because we tend to focus on some of those negative things and don't know how to get out of that cycle.
So how do you get out of that cycle?
So we have this little process that we teach people. And I tell them that you have to scale everything in your life on a 1 to 10 scale.
Okay.
And I call it the 1 to really crappy scale.
Right.
So 10 being the worst,
Right.
Think about your life or my life. Think about what's the worst possible thing that's ever happened to you. What is that? What does that look like? How awful does that make you feel? That's your 10.
Okay.
So for me, my 10 is that my son Bryce died.
Right.
Nothing else in life really can compare to where that is.
Right.
And how awful that was, and how hurtful that is still sometimes. So if I come home from work and the kids have been playing in the house, and I do the laundry and I throw everything into the dryer, and I come back later and I find that the kids had put crayons in the dryer along with everything else and it just happened to be the whites that were in there. And now we've got melted crayon in all of the white clothes, the dress shirts, and all of those types of things. We tend to grow that into an 8. But if you look at what's really going on in life, that's probably a 3, maybe even a 2.
Right.
Right.
So comparing it to the worst thing.
Exactly. So if you have a tendency to always put yourself in a place of misery or scarcity, you really have to scale that and remind yourself, okay, this isn't the worst thing. This is really an okay thing. In fact, I had a friend that so I spoke in a church meeting and talked about this specific thing, and talked about how my 10, was when Bryce died, and how everything else in life to me now seems like it's about a 2 or a 3. Sometimes there are 6s and 8s, and
Sure.
but they're generally not as severe.
Right.
And she came up to me afterward and she says, we're just getting ready to move. And our 5-year-old, we had all of our clothes lined up in the laundry room, kind of the stuff that we're taking to make sure that everything was there. And he opened a bottle of bleach and poured it all over everything.
Oh, no.
And we're leaving in 3 days
Oh,
to move out of the country for this job assignment. And I'm realizing that it felt like a 10 and it's really a 3.
Right.
And so it's really good for us to be able to have that something to compare to.
Right.
You can, take it and compare it to whatever that happens to be in your life. Or if you don't have something really bad or that doesn't feel like it just doesn't feel real, you can borrow my 10.
Yeah.
And just
no
think,
thanks.
and just think, okay, how does it compare to Alan's 10?
Right.
Okay, this really is not a 10.
Right.
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 And suddenly you feel a lot lighter. You feel like you're in a much better place.
Wow. Isn't it amazing that we can control so much of our reaction by just changing our thoughts?
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a huge difference.
That's amazing.
Because that's where most of those things live is in our thoughts.
Yeah.
We roll them around and around and around in our head, and they pick up some momentum.
They do.
And it's like being on a roller derby course.
Yeah. Especially if you're tired.
Right.
Or worn out or sick, everything is much worse.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We're going to take a quick break, but when we get back, would you mind finishing telling us a few other lessons you learned along the way and maybe advice that you would give to others who have been in similar situations?
Sure.
Awesome.
How many of you out there feel like your life is chaotic, crazy, and completely awful compared to the norm? What if I were to tell you that you are normal for you? I am so excited to announce that my book, Normal for Me by Tamara K. Anderson, is now available for purchase on Amazon. This book took me 10 years to write, and I share 20 years worth of lessons learned in my life detours, including being in a car accident and having 2 of my children diagnosed on the autism spectrum. In this book, I share the secrets of how I made it from despair to peace with God's help. I also include a bonus diagnosis survival guide at the very end of my Normal for Me book. The Diagnosis Survival Guide includes 12 tips to survive and thrive in tough times. Wouldn't you like to know what those are? So what are you waiting for? Grab your copy of Normal for Me today on Amazon.
And we're back. Today I'm interviewing Alan Smith about some of the life detours he has been on, and he's been giving us some advice of what he has learned having a child who died with SIDS, having a stroke at age 18, and also being an early caretaker and bullied when he was young. So, Alan, we have talked about awfulizing, and we've also talked about making a scale in our minds of what's really awful, and then when bad things happen during the day, also putting that on this awful scale and saying, okay, this really isn't as bad as that one thing. So we kind of tone down our reaction to it. So those are 2 just amazing tips. What other advice or things have you learned from all these things that you have been through in your life?
So, there are so many things that we can learn if we just pay attention.
Yes, that's true.
You talked a little bit about being about the fact that I was bullied when I was younger.
Yes.
And it was the kids in my neighborhood.
Right.
And there was one specific person who was just pretty horrendous, pretty awful to me, and looked for every opportunity to make my life miserable. At least that was my perception at the time.
Sure.
And honestly, looking back, he's just being a normal kid and just didn't have a sense of, how you treat people.
Right.
Or maybe he did. I don't know.
Right.
But it's not something that I've held on to. And it's because I had an opportunity at one point in my religious upbringing. We often have an opportunity to go and be in a very spiritual place. And one of the opportunities is to stand in a circle of prayer. And one of the things that they say to you is that if you have any hard feelings towards someone in the circle, that you should withdraw. Well, it just happened that we were both had the same opportunity at the same time. And so this person was there standing across from me in this circle. And I had the opportunity at that minute to say, do I withdraw? Do I remove myself from the situation, or do I continue and just let go of it? And I chose to let go.
Wow.
I just decided, okay, here's my chance. Here's how it's going to be. It was a split second. It wasn't something that I had time to think about, to plan, to work through, all those things that we put together when we're trying to forgive someone. It was an instantaneous, either I do it or I don't.
Right.
And I did it.
Wow.
And that was 30 years ago. And I can honestly say that in the last 30 years, I have not harbored any ill will towards him.
Wow.
It just went away. And obviously that's not my doing.
Right.
I believe that's part of, God's plan. I consider that to be a part of the atonement. Because I'm Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ and for what he did for us. I believe that was taken. I offered it up and said, I'm willing to give it up. And he said, I'm willing to take it.
Wow.
And I've never had another ill feeling or anger towards him in any way, shape, or form. And about 13, 14 years later, I got a phone call and they said that this person had a heart attack and died at a very young age.
Wow.
And I felt incredibly blessed that it was something that I had let go of, and I could go to the viewing and I could go to the funeral, and I didn't feel like I was still mad. I mean, it wasn't there. And so it was amazing to me that I had that opportunity and that I was able to just let go. And what it's taught me over the years is that it doesn't have to be a long drawn out process. I can just say it and it can go away. It's just a matter of releasing it and saying, here you go, please take it away. And it'll go away.
That is awesome, because often when we harbor bad feelings towards someone, it's doing us more harm than it probably ever did for them. Right.
Yeah, they're oblivious. They don't know that. They don't know what's going on in our heads.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's us that it's hurting. That is a powerful lesson. And God is strong enough to help us overcome those feelings, and he can take them.
Yep. As long as we're willing to give them.
Yeah.
And get rid of them and give them away and let them be somewhere else and just not exist, then he'll take them away.
That's amazing. That's a fantastic lesson to learn. So what advice do you give to people who are grieving or who have lost a family member or a child or someone close to them? I know you've had a chance to counsel them. So what advice do you give to those people?
So one of the things that I talk about a lot is embracing the new normal.
Ooh, tell me about that.
So by new normal, what I mean is the place where we're at now, because that's normal for us now.
Yes.
For me, the day before my son died, I was a dad. The day after my son died, I was still a dad, but I didn't have my son.
Right.
Normal had changed. For me, normal was never going to be the same as it was before.
Right.
And so I have to learn how to adapt and how to work within the range of what normal is now. I've heard this story told, and I've told it a lot of times over the years. It's like you're going to go on vacation and you've planned this amazing trip to Italy and you've got all of these plans for where you're going to go, and you go to the airport and you get on the plane and they say, welcome to this flight that's going to get into Italy, and, relax, go to sleep. We'll wake you up when we get there. And you go to sleep and you wake up and they land and you get to the gate and they say, welcome to Holland. And you're like, but wait a minute, I was planning to go to Italy. But you're in Holland. And there's amazing things in Holland. There's a lot of really cool stuff that you can see. There's windmills and there's tulips and there's wooden shoes and there's all of these really cool things, but it's still not Italy.
Right.
And so you're in this different place that can be really wonderful and can be great. It's just not the same as what you were expecting. And so learn to identify that things can still be good, is a part of that. The other part of that is when you're on the other side of the table from someone who is in a new normal space.
Yes.
Or if you're the person in the new normal space, realizing that anyone that's not in the normal space with you doesn't get it. They don't really understand what you're going through because they go home to their normal.
Yeah.
Their normal isn't affected daily by whatever it is you're going through.
Yeah.
It is affected by whatever's going on at their place or where they live or where they work or wherever they're at that moment. So oftentimes people who've had a loss and in the beginning, people just crowd around them and just support them and hold them up and take care of them and bring meals and just walk by and drop off flowers or whatever. There's a ton of this, but as they get reabsorbed into their new normal. So for me, Bryce died and we come home to a house that was now empty instead of having a baby there. But our neighbors still came home to their 2 kids.
Right.
Our neighbors down the street came home to their 4 kids. And so they're absorbed in managing all of their things in their life. And it's 2 weeks past the funeral. And so they don't think about the fact that I'm still over here going home to an empty house.
Yeah.
Because they're absorbed in all the other things. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally does.
And so it's about creating a place where you remember that somebody's in a new normal space and finding ways to still support them in that place and be able to help them with whatever happens to be coming up for them or whatever is getting in their way or causing them to, have a really hard day that day. And it doesn't have to be crazy hard. It doesn't have to be a lot of work. It can be really simple things, sending them a text, thinking about you today.
Right.
Just so that they know that somebody's aware of them.
Right. That they're in a new normal right now.
Right. Acknowledging when there's some sort of an anniversary or some sort of a date that's significant. So for many years, we had friends who would drop us a note on Bryce's birthday.
Oh.
Or somebody would drop off flowers, or a friend would go by the cemetery and leave flowers on the grave. Without saying anything.
Right.
It didn't have to be something that they, were in our face about because they didn't know how to manage it or what to say about it.
Right.
Somebody recently, remembered that the day that our son died was August 14th and did a very kind thing for us on that day.
Oh.
And so it was like 23 years later, somebody still remembered.
Right.
And so that was pretty fantastic. So just being aware of what other people's needs are, putting a little note in your calendar that says, hey, so-and-so's son's birthday is this day.
Yeah.
A year from now, so that you remember to check in on them.
Yeah.
On that specific day or the day before to say, hey, just checking on you. And keep it simple. Don't say, I'm so sorry or whatever. Just say, I'm thinking of you. That's all they need. They just need to know that somebody's aware of their circumstance and where they're at.
That is amazing advice. And I love the practical application of it, of just setting a reminder on our phones. That is so smart.
We have so many easy reminders.
Yes, we do.
In the olden days, my wife still has this, a flip calendar with everybody's birthdays, right? And,
yes.
And so each month you look at everybody's birthdays. You don't remember deaths in the same way.
No, you don't.
So, but we've got such easy electronic devices available and things that we can do that we can just jump in and give ourselves a reminder. Or just schedule a reminder 3 weeks or a month or 2 months out that just says, hey, check on Chelsea or check on Robert or whomever it is that you want to check on.
Yeah.
And make sure that they're okay. Make sure that they know that someone is thinking of them. That's all that people want. They just want to know that they're loved and thought of.
Yeah. And that means so much.
It does. It makes a huge difference in somebody's day.
It does. Oh, that is fantastic advice. Now, you also mentioned to me before we started the show that you had some advice with regards to Sleepless in Seattle, the movie. So why don't you elaborate on that a little bit?
So my wife and I have, we like certain movies.
Yes.
Because they just have such wonderful thoughts to them. And, in that movie, Tom Hanks is being interviewed by a radio personality on a New Year's Eve when he's all by himself, or no, it's Christmas Eve, I think.
Okay.
And she said, "How did you get through it?"
Mm.
And his thought was, I just remind myself to breathe. And hopefully someday I won't have to remind myself to breathe.
Right.
And so the advice that I give people is that, you don't have to live for an entire hour. You can just live moment to moment as you're able to. Start with one breath and then start with another breath.
Yeah.
And pretty soon you'll be able to take 2 breaths and be able to manage those 2 breaths. And if that's all you can do is remind yourself to take those 2 breaths, then that's what you do.
Yeah.
And be in that place and be okay with it. Nobody has an expectation that's different. Nobody expects you to be perfect or to do something that's beyond your ability. You just have to know that it'll get better.
Yeah.
It does get better. It gets easier over time, and things are softened. Thankfully, we are able to manage things better. It still hurts that my son died.
Yeah.
And that's been 23 years. But I have all these amazing things that have happened because of that. And so, and I know that looking back, that hindsight is really easy to use.
Yeah.
But if you're in a bad place right now, just do it a breath at a time.
I love that. And that's advice that I give as well. That for me, I usually say 5 minutes, but sometimes you can't even go 5 minutes. So I love that. Just a breath at a time.
A breath at a time.
That's beautiful.
One inhale, one exhale.
And I can do that. There you go.
And that's all it takes.
Yeah.
And there's something that happens when you release that breath that helps you move forward. And so just remember to move forward as you're able.
That's beautiful.
Nobody has any bigger expectation than that.
Wonderful. That is fantastic. So how did God help you through all of this? You talked about the power of forgiveness, but how did he help you through the loss of your son?
So he put amazing people in my life. He directed us in some of the things that we needed to do, because we weren't great at making decisions at that point, because our brain was not great at processing things. We were still in a bad place.
Right.
And so soon after Bryce died, we moved to a new home. And we made some amazing connections with friends who 25 years later, 23 years later, are some of our best friends. There's 3 or 4 or 5 couples that are just incredible friends that we just relied on. We had neighbors to either side and neighbors across the street, and they took care of us. They didn't judge us. They didn't act like we were weird or that we did strange things, which we did, because you do strange things when when you're not completely yourself, or when you're in a new normal, right?
Yep.
And so he placed wonderful people in our lives to help us and to support us. Yeah. And so creating those connections has been a lifelong help to us. He also gave us the ability to have perspective around things like the awfulizing that I was talking about. That didn't just come to us. We were in the right place at the right time. And somebody shared that with us and we embraced it.
Right.
So part of it was our choice to embrace what was placed in front of us. God will give us amazing opportunities, but we have to choose.
Yes.
And we have that option to choose anything in our life. And I think that we forget that sometimes. I think we feel so wrought upon by daily occurrences and awful experiences and things that people do, or we don't get to process it all, and we just feel like we're totally overwhelmed, but we forget that we can choose how to manage that. And so we have to take a step back sometimes and take that deep breath.
Yes.
And then choose to move forward and choose which direction to move forward.
Oh, that's amazing. So basically he put earthly angels in your path.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And he does that.
Absolutely. Of course he does.
Yeah. Yeah. He's not going to leave us alone. So watch for those earthly angels in your own life.
They are. They're everywhere you look. You just have to be open to the opportunity, and be open to allowing somebody into the space where you are. Because if you're hurting, sometimes you just put up all your walls and don't let people in. But you just have to let them in a little bit, and they don't have to be all the way in. They don't have to be in the middle of it. They don't have to know all of the pain. You don't have to, ugly cry in front of them with the snot and the tears and everything, the drool,
right. Yeah.
But if they know that you're in that place, people are more than willing to just be that person that checks in on you, or that says, let's go to dinner, or says, let's have a barbecue, or let's go for a walk.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be huge things. It can be little things, or that leaves flowers on your porch.
Yeah.
Or that plants flowers in your yard when you're not looking. Or, my wife and I used to love to do that. We'd do drive-by plantings. Because if we had extra flowers, we'd just stop at one of our friends' houses or some random house, and we'd throw some flowers in the ground.
That's awesome.
Because it's just fun to do crazy things like that. But, that's how God got us through things, is doing things spontaneously and looking for ways to help other people, because other people were taking care of us.
Yeah. And I think that's a great example that you and your wife set, was taking this hurt and this loss and turning it into something that allowed you to help others who are going through that same hurt and loss. So I think that probably also just helped you heal. Don't you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's awesome. So you have some resources that you'd like to recommend. A couple of books, right?
So I'm a big reader.
Oh, yes, me too.
Given that I also write and read and listen to everything I can get my hands on, I have some favorite books that have really given me some direction. And some of them are just really simple. So one of my favorites is Who Moved My Cheese?
Oh, tell us about this book.
Because I have you read this one?
I don't know if I have.
Oh my gosh, this is an incredible book. It talks about there's two little men, and they're Hem and Haw, and there's two little mice named Skim and Scurry.
Okay.
And they live in this maze, and every day they go to the cheese station to get cheese. Well, one day they show up and there's no cheese. And so they show up the next day and there's still no cheese. And they show up again and there's still no cheese. Which is just like our lives. Sometimes we show up for things and all of a sudden they're gone.
Right.
So all of a sudden something has changed, just like our lives.
Yeah.
Things change. I had a friend who got laid off his job last week.
Ugh.
And so things change. We don't necessarily get to choose again what happens in our lives. We just have to choose how to manage it. So in Who Moved My Cheese, you have Hem and Haw, the two little men who just stay right there and wait and lament and miss their cheese and miss how nice it was to show up and the cheese was always there. And you have Skim and Scurry, who just take their little sneakers off from around their necks and put them back on, and they go out into the maze and run around to find new cheese. And so you can tell by their names, Hem and Haw, that we are very much like those people who just kind of hang out and wait for something to happen, wait for somebody else to do it for us. Well, I can guarantee you nobody's going to just do it for you all the time.
Right.
Once in a while, somebody will step into your life and do something wonderful for you. And then you need to move forward and use it. Right.
Yeah.
And take advantage of the fact that somebody did something wonderful and make it a part of who you are, and be able to move forward and make it part of someone else's life too.
Yes.
But I loved Who Moved My Cheese because it just reiterates in our lives that, guess what? Everything's going to change.
Yes.
And we just need to be prepared for that.
Yeah. And keep looking for your cheese.
And just keep looking for your cheese. Go to a new cheese station.
There you go.
Go find something else in life that's going to help direct you there.
That's awesome.
And then there's lots of other books that will, do some other things for you like that, but that's probably my favorite.
That is awesome.
So another one of the books that I really have liked is one called Leadership and Self-Deception. It's by the Arbinger Institute. And it's one where it just gave me a lot of thoughts and helped direct my life in a way that was interesting to me. Because I hadn't thought of things in that same vein before, and how we deceive ourselves.
Ooh.
We put up a lot of walls, and we put up a lot of things that create stories or thought processes that aren't necessarily accurate. And so that's one that I would recommend that people go take a look at.
So that just kind of helped you think about things a little bit differently.
It just gave me some really good thought processes to work through and to kind of think about. And it was really good.
Awesome. Well, we will definitely link those in the show notes so that people can find it. Now, there might be somebody who has just really resonated with you and your story. Is there a way that they can reach out and find you?
So you can email me. I'm using my author email for that. It's adshermanauthor@gmail.com.
Awesome.
Because that's just a really easy place for me to kind of gather that type of information and those types of emails into one place where I can follow up and make sure that I'm taking care of people.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Alan, you have been such a joy to have on the show, and the bits of wisdom that you have shared with us are just amazing and profound. So I'm sorry you had to go through so many hard things to learn those bits of wisdom, but I'm so thankful that you are able to share them with us and to have such an amazing perspective on life. So thank you for sharing this with us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me today.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's show. I know that there are many of you out there that are going through a hard time, and I hope you found things that have been useful today as you listen to the podcast. If you would like to access the show notes from today's podcast, visit my website. It is storiesofhopepodcast.com. That is where you'll find favorite quotes from today's episode and shareable memes. And those are fun because you can share them with your friends on social media. You will also find the links mentioned throughout today's episode, so you don't have to remember what those were. And also all the tips that were shared. Sometimes tips are shared so much throughout an episode you forget. What were those great things? So go to the show notes, storiesofhopepodcast.com, to look up these fantastic resources. If someone kept coming to mind during today's episode, perhaps that means that you should share this with them. Maybe there was a story shared or a tip that they really, really need to hear. So go ahead and share this episode with them. May God bless you, especially if you are struggling, with hope to carry on and with the strength to keep going when things get tough. Remember to walk with Christ, and He will help bear that burden. Above all else, remember, God loves you.